Aperture, shutter speed, and ISO are the three ingredients you need to understand in order to shoot manual photography. And shooting manual photography is a great skill to have. It allows you full creative control over your photos, and it really allows you to get the exact look and feel that you want to get. You don't always have to shoot in manual mode, but it really helps to know how it works and to be able to do it. We've already got a video where you can learn manual photography in 10 minutes, but that can feel like a lot of intense information in a reasonably short space of time. So we thought we'd break this down into each individual element: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So today we're going to cover aperture, next week we'll do shutter speed, and then the next week we'll do ISO. So let's talk about aperture. What is it? How does it work? How do you control it? And what is it going to affect in your photo? Well, the aperture is actually inside the lens. When you're adjusting the aperture, you are adjusting how wide open or how big that aperture is. You can make it larger and then smaller. This is usually controlled on the camera, but it can be controlled on the lens. Now, it differs a little bit from brand to brand, but generally speaking, you will just adjust a dial, which will adjust the aperture. There can also be an aperture ring on the lens, which you can turn to change the aperture. And the aperture is measured by an f-stop number, and that'll look a little bit like this: f/4, f/8, f/2.8, and so on. Now, the lower that number is, the more wide open your aperture will be. So for example, f2.8 will be more wide open than f4, which in turn is more wide open than f8. And this will affect two different things. First up, it affects the amount of light that can come in through the lens to hit that sensor. The more wide open the aperture is, the more light can come in. So the lower that number is, the brighter the exposure will be. So the brighter your image will be. The other thing that it affects is the depth of field. So the more wide open that aperture is, the shallower your depth of field will be. And that means that the focal plane is just thinner. It means that, for example, right now the camera is focused on me. So this is where the focal plane is. The depth of field is basically how much in front of and behind the focal plane is in focus. The less it's in focus, the shallower the depth of field is. That means that the background will be blurrier. The more in focus, so the deeper the depth of field, the more in focus the background will be. So I'll give you a couple of examples so you can see exactly what I mean. Shooting something at f2.8, you can see here the subject is nice and in focus, but the background is more blurred out. If we just change that same exact photo, but now shot at f8, you can see it's a pretty big difference. The subject is still obviously in focus, but the background is now much less blurred out. That's because we have a deeper depth of field. More of the photo is in focus. Now, for example, if you're shooting a landscape photo where you've got a nice, deep and interesting landscape, you might want more of that to be in focus. You might want all of it to be nice and sharp and in focus, in which case you might shoot at something like f8 or f11. But if you want to shoot a portrait, you might want to shoot with a nice blurred background. So you might shoot at something like f1.8, even f1.4. Different lenses have different maximum apertures that you can set them to. So for example, the lens I'm using right now, the biggest I can get that aperture is f2.8. But then there are special lenses which will go to f1.8, f1.4, even f1.2, which will be really, really wide open in terms of the aperture. That'll allow a lot of light in and also get a very, very shallow depth of field. So you get a lot of blur in the background. Some lenses, like at f1.2, will actually get you such a shallow depth of field that perhaps the eyes of your subject might be in focus, but even by the time you get to the back of the head, it starts to become out of focus. So ultimately the aperture is controlling those two different things. The amount of light that can come in through the lens and then hit your sensor, so the exposure, and then the depth of field, essentially how blurry is the background, how much of the image is in focus. And that's aperture in a nutshell. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. We'll do shutter speed next week and then ISO. But if you have any questions, absolutely pop them down in the comments and we'll do our best to get back to you ASAP. There's links to all of the stuff used for this video and all of those photos down in the description, so you can go and check that out for yourself. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got new videos every day all the way up to Christmas Eve. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.